PVC is an awesome material for DIY projects because it's lightweight, fairly easy to work with, and you can build just about anything with it. You can find build plans for trellises, furniture, and all kinds of wild things on the internet. Sometimes, however, your project needs more strength and durability than PVC can offer. That's where EMT conduit and maker pipe connectors come in and might be a viable option for you in the future. They work just like PVC in the way that you simply cut, connect, and build, but they give you a sturdier, longer-lasting frame that can handle heavier loads, outdoor weather, and even big structures that PVC might struggle with. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can upgrade your existing PVC builds or your plans by swapping in EMT conduit and maker pipe connectors when your project calls for that extra durability. We'll talk about the main differences in the materials and their assembly, as well as look at some side-by-side comparisons of which maker pipe connectors to use in place of PVC fittings that you might already be familiar with or already have in your build. The main difference is probably pretty obvious because it's the difference in the material that they're made out of. EMT conduit and maker pipe connectors are made of steel, whereas PVC and their fittings are made out of plastic. Now, like I said, this is meant to be an upgrade if you already have a frame that is struggling with the weight and you need that extra durability that steel has to offer. That's one reason that you might upgrade and, pay the difference in the cost to get that extra strength and durability that you might need. And then the biggest difference between PVC fittings and maker pipe connectors is how they're designed to interface with their tubing. PVC fittings are designed to be glued together for strength. This is a bit messy and also forces you to build things perfectly the first time around. Once you glue fittings and pipes together, they're pretty much set and can't be changed. Maker pipe connectors, on the other hand, are much more forgiving. They're all made up of multiple pieces that clamp around the EMT conduit. This design allows for complete modularity because you can loosen the hardware and reposition the connectors around as needed. This is helpful for mistakes while building, and it's also really handy if you're building something that needs to be taken apart and stored or transported over and over again. The clamp design also gives you the flexibility to add connectors to your build much easier than with PVC. Let's say you want to add a simple brace to your project. With PVC, you'll need to figure out exactly where that brace needs to go, cut your PVC, and then add the fitting. With maker pipe, you can simply add a connector exactly where you need that brace, and you can move it around really easily if you need to. Because of all of this, I think building with the EMT conduit and maker pipe is a little easier than PVC. And in fact, if you think about just the overall building process, whenever you're cutting PVC, it's pretty simple. You just use a handheld tool or an electric tool if you have it to be able to cut PVC really easily. But EMT conduit, even though it's steel, is not that much more difficult to cut. In fact, it's probably just as easy because you just use a handheld pipe and tube cutter that simply just rotates around the conduit. You tighten the knob, rotate it around, and you just keep doing that until you cut all the way through it. That's really all you have to do to customize the dimensions and build. And then maker pipe connectors, like I said, they just clamp around the conduit and you just need a 5mm hex wrench to put them together. So really building is not that much different. In fact, I think it's a little easier to build with EMT conduit and maker pipe because you don't have to use glue and you're using all handheld tools and you don't have to factor in those measurements and get them exact the same way that you do when you're building with PVC. A couple other benefits of EMT conduit and maker pipe as well are kind of have to do with the weather. So I kind of mentioned briefly, if you are building outside, say you have a greenhouse and you want it to be up for several years, then it's going to be exposed to the sun, obviously, and some cold weather. Now, PVC is not UV stable, meaning it's going to get brittle pretty easily if it's subject to cold and then hot, and then it has those UV rays impacting it. It's going to impact the long-term and longevity of the PVC and the tubing and everything that you're using. Maker pipe and EMT conduit are made of steel and they have that galvanization and corrosion resistance, so they hold up really well to the UV rays from the sun, and they hold up well in colder environments, and you don't have to worry about them, heating up and getting cold and then, potentially breaking or becoming brittle the same way you have to worry about that with PVC. Now that we have an understanding of the main differences between PVC and conduit and their fittings, I want to talk about some of the different connections that you'll find for PVC and then which maker pipe connectors you would use to supplement those in your project. So we kind of already looked at the 90-degree connector, but we'll highlight it again. And essentially the main difference, as we talked about, is the fact that you press in the PVC, and that's going to go in the fitting, and you're going to join 3 pieces of PVC together. And this is the 90-degree fitting for PVC. And the maker pipe 90-degree connector is going to work very similarly, except you're going to have this vertical piece of conduit. And unlike the PVC fitting, it doesn't just stop in there at the edge. You can actually put this anywhere along this piece of conduit. It'll clamp around, and you can adjust where you have that and where it goes. But most of the time, if you're building a cube or rectangle, it'll sit kind of similarly to the PVC where you have it like that. And then you have your other 2 pieces of conduit that go into it. And then, of course, you'll just use the hardware to clamp all 3 of these pieces of conduit together. And that's kind of the main difference between the 90-degree connector for PVC and maker pipe. And it's really pretty straightforward in terms of swapping out that one. Just the difference is the through connection for this middle piece of conduit, which can make a big difference on your impact or on your project and kind of give you different functionality and different things. Now, if we look at some other examples, they might not be as obvious. So this one is the PVC elbow. We don't really have an elbow that functions the exact same way where it's even on both corners, because essentially you'd put in the PVC, of course, where you snap it in, and then you have this 90-degree elbow. And you can make the exact same connection with maker pipe and conduit. You just essentially do it this way, where you use the maker pipe T connector and you just have it flush with the end. So just like that 90-degree connector where you have that through piece of conduit in the middle, you just have the same kind of design here on the T connector where you just want this to be flush with the end, and you can make that 90-degree elbow in the same way. It just functions kind of different and goes together in a different way just because you're clamping the two pieces together like that. There's also some other fittings that are pretty obvious as well. You've got the PVC coupling, which of course is going to allow you to just join two pieces of PVC together, and you just press them in and then you join them like this and kind of make that coupling connection between the two pieces. And the maker pipe coupling is going to do the exact same thing, except of course it's going to be that clamp style connector, which is the main difference. But essentially you just put the two pieces of conduit together like this, and then you couple them together with the coupling that we make here, and it's going to function pretty similarly the same way. And that's, another pretty obvious one. Now, this is where it gets a little confusing and where you want to kind of pay attention whenever you're building. So the PVC four-way connector, of course, is going to join four pieces of PVC together inside of it, and they're just going to snap in place as we've seen with all the other ones, where essentially you just put these four in, and then you have this kind of X-brace between all four pieces. Now, you can't do this exact same connection with any of the maker pipe connectors. The closest thing that we have is the 180-degree connector, but this allows you to join the three pieces of conduit together, where you have the piece of conduit in the middle here, and then you've got the two pieces of conduit coming out of this to make this X shape just like that. So it's pretty much the same, except it's three pieces of conduit instead of four. Now, if you did have this where it's, based on the dimensions, you kind of needed this to be four pieces of conduit, what I would do is essentially have this piece of conduit, you would join it together with a coupling first somewhere else. So you can imagine having the coupling put together and then a piece of conduit coming out of it, and then that running through the middle of the connection. That'd be the best way, I think, to do this same kind of thing, where you have these four pieces of conduit joining together. I would just put the coupling next to the 180 and get that dimension that you need. Now, there's another connection that is known, and I think this is the most confusing one. This is the PVC T connector, but the maker pipe T connector functions differently pretty much across the board. So this T connector for PVC joins three pieces of PVC together. You've got the two in the top that join together, and then you've got the one coming in the middle. But you wouldn't use the maker pipe T connector in this same way, because this is made for two pieces of conduit, not three. So if you were going to make this exact same T connection with EMT conduit and maker pipe, you'd want to use the 180-degree connector, because you would have the piece of conduit in the middle, just like this. It would just sit flush with the end, and then you'd have the two pieces of conduit coming out of it, just like this. So if you were making this PVC T, you'd want to swap that out for the maker pipe 180-degree connector, not the maker pipe T connector, which I know it's a little confusing because of the naming scheme, but because of the type of connection you're making, this is what makes the most sense. You'd be using the 180-degree connector. Now, if you are going to use the T connector, kind of the way it's meant to be used for the maker pipe T connector, like I said, it just joins two pieces of conduit together. And if you have a horizontal or a vertical, kind of like we mentioned in that example earlier, you'll have your piece of conduit, and then you can clamp your maker pipe T connector onto that pretty much anywhere along that span, even flush with the end like we showed for the elbow. And then you can branch off of that and have your other piece of conduit to create that brace and add that different connection and different piece of conduit in whatever direction you need it to go. But just remember, the main thing for the maker pipe T connector is it joins two pieces of conduit together, not three. The last fitting that you'll find commonly available is the 45-degree one. And this essentially, of course, just allows you to connect two pieces of PVC together, and then it just sends one off at a 45-degree angle. Now, you could use this for bracing in your project, although it's a little bit more complicated and doesn't give you as much functionality as the maker pipe 45-degree connector does whenever you're adding braces. And that's just because because of the clamp style functionality of the connectors that we've talked about a bunch, where essentially if you have a 45-degree brace that you need to add, you can essentially just clamp this onto the vertical in your build. You can't really easily do that with the 45-degree PVC fitting because it breaks up this span and adds this 45-degree fitting without continuing it on. But as you can see here, if you're doing the same thing, then you would just add the 45-degree brace wherever you want to and just clamp it around the conduit. So this gives you a lot more functionality and a lot more options for bracing your frames, which of course is going to increase the overall strength and rigidity of your projects. That's pretty much it, guys. I hope you guys found this useful and enjoyable. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those down below in the comments. If you did find this useful, please leave a like and consider subscribing. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.